One of the biggest updates to CS2 just came out, and you might have missed it if you didn't read the patch notes closely. And for those of you guys that missed it, there was actually an update on the 28th of February that made a couple of general optimizations to the game, a couple of changes on Inferno, and in the patch note they even say that they changed something that has to do with the spawn prioritization, but they didn't really go into depth. So you might be thinking, Austin, what gives? What was so big about the update? Well, the part that they didn't really go into detail on is actually the biggest update that I think CS has gotten in a very long time, and I want to take an in-depth look at all of the new spawn changes and kind of talk about how I think they're going to change the meta, and we'll do that right after a quick word from our sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by SkinsMonkey. SkinsMonkey is a site where you could trade skins that you already have to get some skins that you might want. That way you can hop into your next game with some fresh new skins. All you have to do is log into the site through Steam, put in the skins that you don't want anymore, grab the skins that you do, and then click trade. Trades happen almost immediately, and any balance that you don't use in the trade will roll over for a trade that you might do in the future. Right now you can get a free $5 if you were to use code Austin on the site, and if you were to use my code, you would get an additional 5% on top of the 30% deposit bonus. So let's say if you deposit $100, that means you would get $135 if you use my code to deposit. So make sure you guys check out SkinsMonkey, and let's get right back into the video. Now, upon first glance, you might not actually notice the difference here, but there is only 5 spawns on CT side Mirage, and most of the people's initial reaction is that this is a good change because now you will no longer get these annoying spawns in the back. But the problem is that since you're never getting those annoying spawns in the back, it's always going to change the timings of when you can be where. For example, let's say I'm the B player, and before I would always get this spawn. It would take me significantly longer to get to B, which would change the timings on if the other team decided to rush B. Sometimes you would have a bad spawn, sometimes you would have a good spawn, and it would change how you played the spot. But now you're always going to have a spawn that's not that bad, or that's the best case scenario. And because of that, imagine this: no matter what happens on CT Mirage, there will always be a player that can take this spawn and go window. Before, there was sometimes when you wouldn't get that spawn, but now somebody will always have it. So you can make entire teams who just decide that if we get this spawn, no matter who it is, we're going to practice them making the cat jump. It can completely change the dynamic of how the CT meta plays because you now are able to always have somebody with a good spawn. Now, I'm not really complaining about this change on Mirage. I do think this was a long time coming because these bad spawns were very, very hard to play, especially if you're the opper. Let's say you're the opper and you always get these really bad spawns. You can just never go window, right? So it does make sense in that regard, but the problem is that they didn't only change CT side Mirage, they actually changed every map, and I want to go ahead and look at some more examples. Starting with T Mirage as well, they've actually removed about 7 spawns, because before you would be able to spawn here, 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 and here. And the reason that I remember it was because I had instant window lineups from all of these spots, because that's just what you did. You would throw instant window smokes if you got those spawns. But the problem is that now you're no longer able to spawn there. They just completely removed them. And I'm not really sure why they've done this. I guess now everybody will always be grouped up together, but these back spawns didn't really change any of the timings, unless of course you were going for a fast B rush, where if you got the spawn that was way over here, I guess that spawn's not good, but you can still get this one. So I'm not really sure what the idea of removing these spawns were, but what it does do is it makes the, again, mid-fight very difficult because you can no longer have a guaranteed instant window smoke. There still is lineups that exist, but there's a chance, and a much higher chance at that you will get all 5 of the spawns that are not able to smoke instant window, which again isn't the worst thing in the world. You can always just stand over here and then do it, but I'm just not really sure why they would do this. It gets even more confusing when we look at other maps like Anubis, because historically on Anubis there was only 5 spawns on T and CT side, and that made everything very consistent. The timings were always the same, and it's pretty much why this map was one of the most popular maps in the last few months. Is because all pros really enjoy this map, and it's very well balanced in that regard. But instead of the original 5 spawns that we have, we've now got 11. So there's a lot more randomness in this map, whereas in CT Mirage they're removing randomness, and in T side Anubis they're adding randomness, and I'm not really sure why that is. Historically, the best A spawn was this one, and what you would do if you got this spawn was you would be able to safely cross over to the behind this part of the box without ever getting spotted. And there was always somebody that had that spawn in original Anubis, but now there's a chance that you get somebody that doesn't spawn there. You can also get these 3 new spawns that have been added, which will get you there a lot faster. But more importantly, these spawns are way closer than the other best spawn previously. And that might not seem like such a big deal, but in a game where milliseconds matter, adding new timings like this, where you can now have an even better spawn, really changes the way that these maps play, because you can be places a lot faster than you could be before. And I'm not saying that we won't get used to that in the future, but to make this change right before the first ever major in Counter-Strike 2's history, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. My point being is that when they're messing with these timings, it doesn't really seem consistent with what they want to do, because on some maps, they're removing randomness, and on other maps, they're making it more random, and I'm not really sure the idea. And in case you're wondering if CT side Anubis is any different, it is not. It is still the exact same, only 5 spawns. Another map that had a bunch of spawns removed was Overpass. As you can see here, there's now only 5 spawns on CT Overpass, which is another weird example of Valve removing the randomness on CT side. But the problem is that now, with only 5 spawns, you never get these forward spawns anymore, and these forward spawns were actually essential to having their correct timing to push Fountain early. Now that might not seem as if it's a bad thing, but the problem is that that will change the way that this map plays, because before what was happening was the CTs were throwing a fountain smoke and a Molotov into party, which would deny the early information for the Ts and allow the CTs to play aggressive, but they no longer have those forward spawns anymore. They're not an option, which means that the timing is not there. And when tested with me and my friends, we were able to have the Ts get all the way up to here before the CTs with the best spawn was able to peak. Because of this, I think that a lot of the metas on Overpass are about to change, and I do think that something as small as changing the spawns can completely shift the dynamic of the early rounds, and those early rounds kind of dictate a lot at the highest level. We might even see a shift of this Overpass becoming a little more T-sided, and I know that that does seem extreme, but think about it. The fastest spawn to get to short B now is here, and instead it used to be a spawn towards over here, and that spawn was the one that you could use to get into short very quickly. But the problem is that you're just a little bit slower, and because of that, when you come around this corner into short, they're always going to be able to beat you on T side. It's not just the CT spawns that were changed, because the T spawns were also moved forward a little bit. There used to be a back row of spawns here that had also just been removed, and I know this because you used to be able to spawn right here on top of the staircase, but now you spawn down here on this part of the staircase. That is new. So they've made the CT spawns consistently farther back, and they've pushed the Overpass T spawns forward, which gives a slight edge to the Ts, which is why, of course, when I talked about this timing, the Ts are beating the CTs to fountain. So it might even become meta for the Ts to throw at this smoke now instead of the CTs, because now the Ts want to use this smoke to stop this early fight completely and to take this map control into party. It's interesting how the entire dynamic of a map can be changed just by messing with the spawn timings. And I don't think that a map demonstrates this better than Vertigo, because what would happen on Vertigo is there was 5, and sometimes there was some rare spawns that you could get, but 5 spawns that you would get on most gun rounds, which was the spawn here, 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 and here. They might have been a little bit shifted, but my point being, they were consistently farther back. And before, when you got this spawn, this was the spawn that you would use to go for a B pick. But you can see now that even though this used to be the best spawn, there's better spawns now, which throws off the timings. It actually leans a little bit more T-sided. And in my testing, in official scrims, team versus team, and in pugs, if you get this new spawn, this one is so much farther than the old fastest one, you could take this best spawn and you can run and beat the CT's 2 ramp. This is not something that you could do before. With the best spawn, if you run as fast as you can get all the way to here before the CTs can peek the crane or side hall. Now, the reason that that's so much worse is because before, the best spawn would be about here. This is a very big difference, because it means that very consistently, the Ts can run through whatever smoke that the CTs want to throw. So, if you want to throw a ramp smoke, it doesn't matter, because by the time the smoke pops, I'm already here. I'm through your smoke. If you want to smoke bottom yellow, which is something we've also talked about, you can smoke bottom yellow, but I'm already through it. Do you see what I'm saying? It means that with this new spawn, you're able to sort of brute force the ramp. And I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, to be clear, but I am saying that this is a significant change that will directly affect the way that these maps are played at the highest level and even at lower levels. And to make such a change before one of the biggest tournaments ever for CS2. Of course, I'm talking about the major that's coming up here in just a month. It seems a little silly to not give teams time to prepare. Now, aside from Vertigo, I think that the biggest change that will have the most impact in the meta is the changes that took place on Inferno. Now, if you've been watching the video closely, you might have noticed that it seems like every CT side only has 5 spawns now, and you would be correct. except for the fact that Inferno has 6, but we won't worry too much about that. Let's focus on the T side changes that are going to change a bunch of things. So before on Inferno, you could sometimes spawn back here. These spawns were known as some of the worst spawns, and if you had these spawns, you would pretty much have to let the CTs take banana, or if you were playing towards mid, you'd have to kind of sit back and wait out the early nades. But now there's only 5 spawns on Inferno, and the problem is that, well, you're always going to have a good spawn. And because you're always going to have a good spawn, you're always going to be able to beat the nades that the CTs throw in banana, which means that you can always take banana control, which kind of makes the map a little weird, because historically taking banana control was kind of dictated by who had the better spawns and also kind of by who had the better utility. But now in practice, the T's are always getting into banana and fighting up through the utility. And I don't want this to be another, oh, Austin's just complaining about a CS change, but seriously, take a step back and think about it. 6 of the 7 maps were just changed. That's not something that you just get used to immediately. This isn't an example of a gun that's just broken on, you know, oh, that's unlucky, the gun's broken. No, no, no. This is 6 maps that have tactically been changed at the beginning of the rounds, and that's going to take a long time to get used to. So to really summarize this update with the spawns, I'd like to say that I think that most of the T changes are a little bit weird and definitely a big question mark. I mean, removing some of the T spawns on Mirage, adding them to Anubis to make it more random, making the Inferno spawns pushed up significantly, moving the Overpass spawns up, making Vertigo an insane rush map, all of those don't really make sense to me. But I do really like the CT changes. I think that most of them make a lot of sense, and there's one more map that I haven't talked about yet where I think the CT changes actually make the map a lot better. For example, on Nuke there is now only 5 spawns, and I think that this is a very good idea, because before you would get spawns that were farther back, and of course we all know that these bad spawns are actually really bad, because if you play A and you get a bad spawn, you would consistently be caught while jumping out of heaven on an A rush. And pro teams know how to deal with that, but a lot of newer players would get caught because they would drop into backside, pull their gun out, and there'd be somebody peeking them HUD. But I do think that making only 5 spawns on CT side Mirage and Nuke does make a lot of sense, because now somebody will always be able to fight outside. That gives the CTs a little bit more room to work with. Somebody will always have a good spawn for ramp, and I think that that's also a good idea. The A players will consistently have better spawns, and that makes the T side a little less random, because you can't just get away with A rushes every round, and I do like that change for the highest level. And in case you're wondering, the T side hasn't been touched, all of the spawns are still the same. Just a few weeks ago, me and Vu actually had a discussion about the spawns in this game and what we would do to change them, and I suggested making it so there was only 5 spawns on every map. The problem was that I didn't think that we would just change the spawns completely to move them closer. Think about the 5 best spawns before on Inferno. That would have been fine to just keep those 5 best spawns and go from there, but they've actually shifted all the spawns up, and so there's no bad spawns anymore, and I think that that was a very silly way to go about it, considering the fact that it just ruins the timings of the map. And for this major, there's going to be a lot more rushes because, well, they just can. And I know that that is exciting Counter-Strike and that's fun to watch, but as a player, I'm not really sure how I feel about that. But that's pretty much going to do it for me. So I'd like to hear some of your guys' thoughts on the update. Is it a good update? Is it a bad update? Leave a comment in below and we'll have a discussion about it.